Extra Mile. I'm Linda BoudreauX. Our guests today are Virginia Souttiere and Evangeline BoudreauX. They're talking about a documentary film that will be shown here in Lafayette at kind of mid-September called Freedom for Birth, and we're going to be finding out about that today. So, Virginia, Evangeline, welcome both of you. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, Freedom for Birth what is it? What are we talking about here?
Freedom for Birth is a 60-minute documentary film that is going to cover basically the concept is about human rights in childbirth. It features a who's who of childbirth experts and human rights attorneys from all over the world, and they're all giving their perspective on why we need to change our current maternity system.
So there's really a lot involved here. We're looking at how, this is a global initiative, right? So
worldwide.
We're looking at how we view birth globally, and for us, particularly here in the United States.
Correct.
You mean it's not perfect the way it is?
Well, it's not perfect. Even though we think it is, there's a lot of room for improvement. And this is worldwide, but especially here in the U.S. as well. You know, we have a lot of interventions that are not necessary in childbirth, you know, and so there is lots of room for improvement. We have an escalating C-section rate and lots of inductions, you know, things that could be improved upon.
Okay. So the idea is that there's a human right involved in how we birth babies?
Correct. I guess the concept is respecting the mother's choice, as in what kind of birth she would like, whether there are no interventions, or where she would like to give birth, be it with a midwife, possibly at home or at a birth center, or even in the hospital, but having her wishes respected.
Okay, so
I was gonna say, to me, I mean, it's you're bringing a life into this world. I mean, how can that? When you're talking about basic human rights, the idea to me that medical, I don't know, the medical mindset dictates that is just, that makes sense.
Right.
You think there's a disconnect or
something?
There's
a huge disconnect. You know, I mean, this is a child. You're bringing in a life. This is a baby, and to impose all these, whether it's different kinds of interventions or just someone else's mindset, you know, to me, there's a huge disconnect.
Okay.
Correct.
And so I take it women are starting to say, wait. I mean, I'm imagining that this movement, and I think it's a movement, is being spurred on by women, right?
Right, it is. And I think a lot of this is happening with other documentary films, like The Business of Being Born and more of The Business of Being Born. Women are seeing these things and realizing what birth can be. They see, you know, births with fewer interventions or no interventions at all, or births in hospitals that are natural births at home, you know, things that aren't your standard birth with lots and lots of interventions that you find in a typical hospital birth.
What about safety, though? Isn't it safety first?
Right, and I think that's the biggest misconception a lot of women feel, you know, and it's not too terribly wrong to think that you're safest in a hospital, but I think the incorrect assumption is that it's unsafe outside of the hospital, in a home birth scenario or in a birth center. And there are statistics that prove that is as safe, if not safer actually, because there are fewer interventions that can lead to some other unwanted and unnecessary interventions.
Because we're built to do this.
Correct.
Yeah. It's like a natural, unless there's something really wrong, it's a natural function, right?
Absolutely,
of the body.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is true, I mean, for low-risk women, right? I mean, for
low-risk women only. I mean, there's complications to some pregnancies that a woman would be considered high risk, and in a high-risk scenario, she would have to be in a hospital.
And that would be appropriate?
That would be appropriate, absolutely.
And interventions would be appropriate?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're not talking here about not having any medical model kind of services available for women.
Not at all. We love OBs and we love them for what they do. You know, they specialize in high risk. They specialize in those scenarios where you need that expertise to handle those scenarios. Yes.
Okay. Now this is kind of personal to you both. You know, you both have children and you've both looked at how we do birthing babies in this country. So why is it important to you? Vanny, I'll start with you because.
Well, for me, I mean, when I got pregnant, probably a little bit older older than any of my friends did.
The late bloomer of the group.
The late bloomer. I was strongly influenced by my friend Virginia here. But hearing about her stories and looking at the outcomes for mothers and for babies with natural childbirth, for me, this was just the route that I chose to go. again, I really wanted my child's birth, my child's introduction to this world to be very gentle, to be as easy as possible from the womb to outside the womb. And I thought that the natural childbirth gave me the best opportunity to give that to him. And I think it did. Even though we were in a hospital setting, it went great. And I think that as much as we were able to in the setting, we were able to accomplish that. But I think even long-term outcomes, and you could probably speak on that better than I could, just for me,
it does show that the more positive view the mother has of herself during a birth experience is projected onto the baby in the way they bond. So sometimes a mom can be affected if she has a traumatic or a negative birth experience.
Well, there's no way not to be, because it is your body. I mean, you are not disconnected from your body. You're just not. So if it's a horrible event, then everything around it is colored and affected by those feelings.
And oftentimes when mothers do have a traumatic birth, they don't get a chance to speak about it because people say, oh, you have a healthy baby. Your baby is healthy. So the mother is kind of marginalized and her feelings are pushed aside because she has this wonderful, beautiful, healthy baby. And she loves her baby, so she doesn't want to see anything around the birth that's negative. But sometimes there are true cases of birth trauma as a result of these interventions.
And I think a lot of times, this is just my feelings, so correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of times people don't even acknowledge or recognize birth trauma when it happens for the mom.
Absolutely.
They know the baby might have birth trauma, but I don't know that people always realize that the mom is being traumatized too, huh?
I agree. That's true. This is my first birth experience had lots of interventions. I don't think I truly understood. I wasn't very birth educated then. And there was a cascade of interventions, is what it's called. I did result in a vaginal birth, but it was still a lot of interventions that resulted in what I viewed later as a very traumatic birth. I'd never heard the word birth trauma. In fact, I didn't know what that was until about 6 months after my child was born, and I read about it on a website. And I just knew that was it. Like, that is exactly what we experienced. It wasn't just myself. My husband felt traumatized. We knew that the baby probably was a little bit traumatized as well. So it's a whole family dynamic that's at play here. But those words aren't really used very often.
Right. And you said something else that's interesting that I hadn't heard before, which was a cascade of interventions. Mm-hmm. Is that like a term that is frequently used? I mean, you didn't make that up, did you?
No, that is a term that's used in kind of the birth world, like the birth community. So your doulas and tend to use these kinds of, or your birth educators, where you walk into the hospital and they may, or any scenario where you're giving birth, they may ask you to put in an IV just to make sure they have access should they need it. And then if you're not progressing fast enough, they may say, well, we want to speed things up a little, and they'll add some Pitocin or something to augment the labor. That may cause contractions to become a little bit stronger than they normally would, because an augmented labor with oxytocin is not the same as a natural labor. So the contractions tend to be longer, stronger, and closer together.
So it'd be harder to manage without.
Yes, it's a lot harder. So the moms oftentimes end up getting the epidural then, or some sort of narcotic to help to cope with that. The epidural can slow the contractions, so then they have to up the Pitocin. And so things can happen. It just kind of is a cycle, and it tends to cycle. And for some women, unfortunately, sometimes that causes distress in the baby when those contractions are too strong, and then the only option is a C-section at that point.
So is that some of what we're seeing in some of the increase in C-sections and that kind of thing? It's really the result of some of these other things that we're doing?
Absolutely.
Okay. We're going to lose one of our partners who has to go pick up her new 4-month-old baby. So, but Evangeline, thank you for joining us today.
Okay. Bye, Lily. See you later.
So you have 3 children.
I do. Expecting a 4th.
So this is really near and dear to your heart. This is a big deal to you, isn't it, Virginia?
It is very personal. And like I said, when I had my first child 6 years ago, I was completely uneducated. I just kind of thought some sort of natural instinct would kick in, and I'd get in there and I'd know exactly what to do and how to birth my baby. And that didn't happen for me. And I think that for a lot of women, I think the core, what I took away from my experience was that women need to feel empowered by their birth, and they need to feel in control of their choices. So when those things are taken away, if you go into a setting and you're not very birth educated, you tend to defer to the doctor, or you defer to the person who's the power in this situation, the power person. And that person may not have the same desires that you have. They may have other motivations behind their, not all doctors, but some may say that they would like to augment with Pitocin, maybe because they're on a time frame that they want to speed up the birth. I just feel it's very important for moms to be educated, and so that they are controlling choice, whatever the choice is. If they choose induction, if they choose C-section, more power to them. As long as it's their choice, they're informed, they know the risks, they know the pros and the cons, and that it's a fully informed choice.
So that's what you're talking about. You're talking about kind of choices made by people who know what they're choosing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because when I went in with my first, I had no idea that a Pitocin labor was any different than a natural labor. It seems silly in retrospect, but at the time, to me, they were the same.
Why would you know?
How would I know?
Really?
Exactly.
Yeah, because it's not something. I mean, you're young. It's your first baby.
Right.
You just we do what we're told.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We really do. We really do. And since then, I've had 2 unmedicated births, and I see those births as very healing, because it is it's very powerful what happens to a woman in birth.
Yeah.
It really is. And women realize their full potential and their full strength in a new way, a way that you haven't before. So I find that it can either really build the confidence or can really shake the confidence, depending on how it goes.
Of the mom.
Right. And I mean, of course, there are situations where you do have a negative outcome because it isn't exactly what you wanted, but it was a necessary outcome, for safety.
Yeah,
and you do have to account for that as well.
And those, you just say, thank God there was something else I could do.
Absolutely.
Earlier, when you were talking about your first birth experience and the fact that it was traumatic for your husband as well, for the dad as well, with the non-medicated births, did you find that was empowering for him as well?
Absolutely.
Because he was there with you, right?
He
was your partner, he was your coach, your buddy.
He was my coach, and that was the difference. When we knew we were going to have our second, we took childbirth classes that were to empower both him and myself so that we could know how to support one another through this process. And he was invaluable. He was basically my doula throughout this labor, and we did hire a doula, so we had doulas as well. But he was the person who kept me focused. He's, kept reminding me, we're doing this for our baby. This is really what you wanted. Those empowering, building me up, instead of being, like in the first birth, we were both sitting there going, what is going on?
Yeah.
With really no support. To sit there and say, you're doing great, this is how it is, you're fine, and that's very powerful to a laboring mother.
Yeah, because labor is not forever. It might,
Right.
It might feel like it's
at the
forever.
time.
It might feel like forever, but actually it's really not.
Right.
Raising the
Absolutely.
child might be forever, but
Right.
but the labor is not.
That's the tough part.
So, Freedom for Birth. How did this documentary come about?
This documentary was put together by 2 British filmmakers who they had had a cascade of intervention birth that ended up in a cesarean section. And I believe from that point on, this birth was 4 years ago for them. Sort of like a lot of couples, you realize there has to be something better. This cannot be the way that birth is meant to be. And so they started to educate themselves and look into alternatives. And they could see in hindsight how they had kind of played into that cascade of interventions and didn't really realize. From there on, they became more birth savvy in the birth world, getting to know those who's who in the childbirth education, people like Anna McGaskin, Michael O'Donnell. These are people who are just world-renowned experts. And they decided, since they're filmmakers, why not make some documentary films about birth to try to help empower others as well. Okay. They've already got 2 films. This will be their 3rd. And its focus is on a Hungarian midwife named Agnes Gereb. She was actually a home birth midwife, but home births were made illegal in Hungary. So she actually was sent to prison for practicing home birth midwifery. There had been no accidents, no ill outcomes, but she continued to practice, so she was sentenced.
And it was against the law, so she was breaking the law.
Absolutely, she was breaking the law.
She wasn't hurting moms and babies,
No.
but she was breaking the law.
Absolutely. Well, one of her mothers who had delivered her first baby, this is Anna Trinovsky, I want to get her name right. She wanted to have her second baby with Anna and could not, with Agnes, and could not. So she actually took her case. She wanted her human rights. She wanted her right to birth at home. So she petitioned the court to go after her country of Hungary with the European Court of Human Rights. She went there and won her right in 2010 to have her home birth. So those laws were overturned because basically the court ruled that it was a woman's right to choose where and with whom they give birth.
So when we started today's show saying that, we're talking about a human right when we're talking about birth, it's also recognized in the legal community as a human right. As a result of this case?
As a result of this case alone. So it's a precedence, which is important for the world as a whole, because now if women find themselves in similar situations in the United States or in the UK, wherever they are, this case can be referenced.
Okay.
So it's really a world-renowned thing that happened here.
So just know, where did she have her baby?
I think she ended up with Agnes again, but that I don't know yet because
Okay.
we have to see the documentary, so I can't. Yeah.
And I want to thank you because you have really taken this on yourself to bring this documentary to us. You've made the contacts and done the paperwork to get the documentary to Lafayette.
Sure, it's actually it's a group effort. So it's myself, Virginia, and it's Evangeline, who just left, as well as Emily Bergeron and Jenny Thompson. And Emily and Jenny are local doulas here, so and childbirth educators.
Well, thanks to all of them. So
yes.
Tell us what, when, where, and what we can expect and how much it's going to cost.
Oh, it's free, which I love to say first. But it's going to be at Cité des Arts, which is here in Lafayette, 109 Vine Street. It's going to be on September 20th. And that's a Thursday, and it's going to go from 7 to 9. And like I said, it's only a 60-minute documentary film, so it doesn't require a whole lot of your time. It's completely free, and then afterwards we will have a question and answer portion or open discussion so that people can feel heard, process the documentary, and maybe find out how they can help themselves.
Will we have local people from the birth community available to talk to us?
Well, we'll definitely have our doulas there.
Okay.
So we definitely have that, and we hope to possibly get a midwife and OB. Whoever we can get there, we will get there.
Okay. And, we've been using the word doula. I'm not sure that everyone in our audience knows what a doula is.
Oh, okay. Well, everyone should know this. This is wonderful. Doulas are labor support persons. So they are there. Their job is specifically to help mom and dad through a birth. They are there to support all kinds of births, cesarean birth, medicated birth, unmedicated birth. They are simply there to help the family feel empowered and to help them ease their way through their birth.
And why do we need doulas, or why are doulas important?
Doulas are amazing.
Because you've had doulas.
I've had two,
You are a doula.
Amazing doulas, and I'm becoming a doula myself. They are absolutely amazing, and there are actually statistics that prove that doulas lower the rate of interventions. Like just having a doula present, even if she's just sitting in the room, moms feel empowered. It's called holding the space. It's a beautiful term. They just hold the space. And just to know that there's a woman who's been there, who's done that, who is in that room and is going to stay there the entire time for you is quite empowering to a mother. Because a lot of times you don't get that in the hospital. You have a nurse, but she may be coming and going.
But she's not really there for you. She's there for the birth process. She's there
Correct.
to make sure that baby gets born and everything's done right. But to have someone feel like they're there just because you're special, I don't think that we have that feeling very often.
I just got goosebumps because it is a beautiful feeling. It's a beautiful feeling. The other important role of a doula is that they can be the objective voice in a scenario where something may come up that may concern you or worry a mother. And it doesn't necessarily mean a medical emergency. It's just you're having your baby, and if you've never done it before, you don't know. So it's something that feels different or something that is different may scare you, concern you, and you have a doula who's experienced who can sit there and say, yeah, that's normal, and you're doing great.
Yeah.
And that's important.
Yeah, it is. So back to the documentary. Is this a worldwide viewing? I mean,
it is.
This is like we didn't just pick
It's
this time
huge.
out of,
No.
the sky.
No, it is going to actually, their goal is to have 1,000 screenings on September 20th, and it is a big deal. So it's going to be seen all over the world. So while we're watching it here in Lafayette, Louisiana, it's going to be seen in the UK. It's going to go global. It's going to be in Hungary. It's going to be everywhere. All languages. It's been translated. So what we're going to witness is something very special, and it's a big deal, and it's a wonderful thing that we're going to have it here in Lafayette.
Is this the first time something's been done like this, in this manner for birth?
I do think so. I think it's the first time they've had a global launch of something that's going to take place on the same night all over the world. So in that sense, it's just showing how as globally we are connected in this effort. There are mothers in countries that aren't as wealthy as the U.S. who have no access to any kind of care. And so they're getting either no care when they're having their babies or substandard midwifery care. So another part of this documentary is to really encourage increasing the amount of midwives we have, because it has been proven statistically that the more midwives you have helping low-risk mothers, the better outcomes you tend to have. Less interventions, lower C-section rate. It's a wonderful thing.
So part of the goal, before I get into part of the goal then of on the part of the people who have organized this, because I think this must be a huge organizing endeavor.
It
Whoever
is.
who's organizing this anyway? Who's doing this?
Well, there's a group called One World Birth,
Okay.
and you can actually access One World Birth online if you want. It's at oneworldbirth.net, and a Google search will pull it up. It's an amazing resource to have. They have wonderful video clips from some of your leading childbirth experts, midwives, attorneys. It's just a wealth of knowledge. So they actually started kind of, I think they springboarded from this One World Birth, where they were doing mini clips of birth information, to this big documentary. They just wanted to, I think when they heard about Agnes, they really wanted to impress upon us that we needed to keep our midwives, not lose them, because we need more. And what's happening is, unfortunately, we tend to have a lot of restrictions being placed on midwives that is limiting their availability for a lot of women. So some women either financially are being excluded from midwifery care, or the wrong insurance, or they just don't have any in their locations, and so their birth options are being limited, as opposed to what the goal would be to have it growing and growing and growing.
So that's really what Freedom for Birth is about. Partly is to unite the world when it comes to not just honoring and respecting the human right that a mom has to deliver her baby the way she wants, but to work toward having the resources available so that she can do it. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
And without getting too much into your own business, Virginia, but I mean, you are having your fourth child, and you would like to have a midwife, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, this is kind of
Yes.
how you see it.
Right.
Has it been an easy journey?
It wasn't very easy to begin with, because I moved here back to Louisiana. I'm very happy to be back in Lafayette, but I've only been here for about a couple of months. So I moved from Florida, and the laws, state to state, vary greatly for how they regulate midwives. So in Florida, it was a little bit, there were fewer restrictions, let's put it that way. So when I came here, I hadn't actually been under an OB's care, because I didn't need to in Florida. But here in Louisiana, there is a little bit of a difference, where you do have to see an OB at least twice, I do believe, before you can see a midwife to be ruled low risk.
Okay.
So that was a little challenging, but
We just want to make sure our moms are safe. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was just a difference,
Right.
Different regulations, and that's important to know that
Yeah.
state to state it varies. I'm just thrilled that we have midwives here in Lafayette. We have two wonderful midwives. We have Ann Lestrap, who does home birth, and we have Lynette Robinson at Gentle Choices Birth Center. Amazing women, just amazing, and it's wonderful that we have them here.
It is, and it does give us options. And Lynette's been on our show before, and so she's just, like you, she's very, very passionate about all of this.
Yes.
Do you think that as, I don't want to make this a women's issue, because it isn't. I think it's a family issue.
Right.
But do you think as families begin to, as we make it more accessible, as we begin to make options more available, do you think it's going to change, from what you know in other states, change our attitude or change our approach to birth and babies?
I would hope so.
Okay.
I think it's going to be a long process, but I definitely think it's a great place to start. I don't think it's an easy process, because I don't think most people are aware yet that we do have a human rights issue here. But I think that there will be more cases like that with Agnes, the midwife in Hungary. I think there's going to be more cases like that locally.
Yeah, because, people can get in trouble here for doing it if they don't follow the rules.
And they do. We had one incident, I think it was in California, of an assistant midwife who had gotten there before the midwife. And what is she going to do? The baby's coming. Does she deliver the baby or not? And she did. Safe outcome, everything well, but she was still prosecuted under the law for practicing without a license.
Okay, and so there are issues still.
There are, and they're here. We just don't know about them, because most of us aren't necessarily in the birth world, so to speak.
And I guess the last point I want to make before we go over the specifics again, we're talking again about low-risk pregnancies.
Low-risk pregnancy, absolutely. High-risk mothers do have to be in the hospital, and there's a reason we have those hospitals, and it's for high-risk mothers. And low-risk mothers too, if that's where they feel more comfortable. I think the key is choice.
Informed consent
consent and choice, and to truly know that when you say yes to this intervention, what the consequences of that could be. Because it's very tragic when moms feel as though they didn't really know, and they agreed to something that maybe had a negative outcome for themselves or their babies.
Okay.
It's very traumatic.
So just very briefly again, the documentary viewing will be when, where?
It is going to be on September 20th, which is a Thursday, and that is at Cité des Arts. It's from 7 to 9. It is completely free to the public. So if you are interested at all in this film and learning more about birth, show up. We would love to have you there and to have your input, your insights, and how you feel about this movement.
And it is a movement and a change in how people, our new babies, meet the world.
Absolutely.
Virginia, thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you for all that you're bringing to our Lafayette community.
Thank you.
And I will see you on the 20th.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And thank you for watching The Extra Mile.